Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
An emergency post.
The point of our show today is to talk about the consequences of what we're seeing around the world with this coronavirus and what I would consider the sheer incompetence in terms of our federal government. So what really caught my attention was 2 or 3 days ago, there was some footage of a plane coming from the affected area in China, landing in Sydney, and the passengers on that plane were allowed to get off the plane. And now we are seeing cases of the coronavirus being picked up in Sydney and Melbourne, and there could be a whole host of other potential cases that are spreading throughout the country. Given that it's the Australia Day long weekend, a lot of people are not sort of tracking the coronavirus closely. So I've been looking at this very closely for the last 48 hours, and there are some serious pieces of information to communicate to the audience. But it's also to call out again, we are just seeing so many bad decisions from our political leadership and in terms of our bureaucrats. So we've been talking about the incompetence around the economy and the allowance of this debt bubble to get out of control. In recent times we talked about the bushfires and how the bushfires were preventable, and basically using expert testimony or evidence to suggest that the deaths that we saw in the bushfires didn't have to happen to the scale that happened. We're now seeing corruption around in terms of these sporting grants and basically trying to bribe for votes. And now we're seeing where we had the ability to prevent this virus coming into our country. There are a whole host of people in public policy circles who like to advocate for the precautionary principle, and yet not enough precautions have actually been adopted by our government, and therefore the virus is now in Australia.
So, John, one of the things I want to highlight is that this virus has quite a long asymptomatic period. In other words, you can be infected and show no signs of distress for a number of days. And of course, if you picked it up in China and then flew back to Sydney, if you were screened at the airport and they screened it based on temperature, you wouldn't actually show any signs, but you could be carrying the virus for some time. And that means, I think, that the checks which are being run at the airports are probably missing the point, insofar that if you don't pick them up when they arrive and you don't have appropriate tracking post their arrival, then the chances are people will disappear into the community. So for me, the screening issues at airports do need to be tightened up, and they do need to be tightened up very soon.
Absolutely.
So we should be absolutely turning the taps right back to essentially try and protect Australia, and yet we seem to be in a situation where the precautions so far seem to be very weak.
Yes. So to give the audience a bit of a summary about this version of the coronavirus. So basically, from what we can tell, it has come from a bat that has gone through a snake that has now been transmitted into humans. I don't understand how that can happen, but that is apparently the DNA map that has sort of indicated it's gone from a bat to a snake, and that has been transmitted into humans. So what we know is that this is what they call now a 4th generation virus. So what that means is that so if I had a virus and then you got it, you are the 2nd generation. So then if you pass it on to someone who passed it on to someone, that's a 4th generation virus. So that's what we understand it to be. The early estimations about is the ability of this virus to transfer. So the critical number is in terms of 1. So if someone's infected and they're going to infect less than 1 person, well then the virus will die out. If it's a 1-to-1 transferability rate, so if I get it and I'm going to pass it on to 1 person, well then that has the potential to really spread throughout the population. So the initial estimates, particularly coming out of the United Kingdom, is that this has a transferability rate of about 2.6. So that has the ability to go quite exponential. And to give some historical precedent, the Spanish flu in 1918 that killed about 20 million people worldwide, they had a transferability rate of about 1.8. So this is more contagious than the Spanish flu, and from the initial reports that I've been hearing, this is more contagious than the SARS sort of crisis that happened in the last 10-15 years. So a couple of other key stats. I mean, once people are affected by this virus, those who need critical medical attention is anywhere between 10 to 20% of those infected. Now, in terms of those who may suffer death, now it's been estimated that it's roughly around 3%. Some of these estimates are coming out of China. There are concerns that the Chinese are underestimating, how potent that this virus may be. It appears that this perhaps may be less potent than in terms of SARS, but more contagious. But on the other hand, what we are seeing out of China is an unprecedented mobilization. 56 million people have been locked down. In the city of Wuhan, basically no one is allowed in the city, no one is allowed out of the city, and there's 11 million people that is basically in that city. So New South Wales has about 12 million people. So think about the population of our state. Basically, the government is saying you're not allowed in, you're not allowed out of the state. So we are talking huge amounts of things that are happening there. And the other thing that should be pointed out is that, like we said before, at least a 5-day incubation period. Once you start to get sick, it may take another 4 or 5 days before you feel that you need to actually go see a medical doctor. So it could be at least a week and a half, if not longer, before you could actually be diagnosed with the virus. And then in that 10-day period, depending on how many people you have come in contact with, it could have spread to quite a few people. Now, there was a report earlier this afternoon by the ABC that's suggesting that Australian authorities are trying to chase down who were on these planes coming from Wuhan, and so far they haven't come up with all the passengers that have basically been on that plane. But on the other hand, so a couple of points to make to point out. So Senator Rex Patrick from South Australia put out some very informative tweets this morning. The Prime Minister has been putting out a couple of press releases over the last few days in terms of this situation. He has taken no action to stop planes from coming in Australia. What I would say, there have been some politicians like Charles Smith from the Western Australian Parliament who we interviewed in 2019. He's called for planes to stop coming into China, from China into WA. So even though some politicians have said, let's actually, stop planes from coming in, the planes are still coming from China into Australia. The government, our government, basically did not do anything to stop any planes from not entering Australia from Wuhan. But the Chinese president actually made the decision that no planes are to leave that province to go anywhere in the world. So here we are relying on our government to actually look after us, and yet it was actually the action of the Chinese president who actually, potentially, may have stopped, some of the spread in terms of the virus coming to Australia. But having said that, 43 scheduled flights from China have come into Australia today on Australia Day, when you look at how this virus may have spread right across China. So there have been cases being picked up in other Chinese cities, other provinces. So the risk is that this virus is spreading, and so we've had a whole host of countries where outside of China where the virus is now being picked up. Hong Kong, Taiwan, the US, France, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Nepal, and South Korea. So it's only been 2 or 3 days, and now we're starting to see it hit multiple countries, and still we haven't seen, what I would call, prudent action to stop, potential latent people from spreading this to even more countries, or to more people coming into Australia that could spread throughout our domestic population. Because one of the big problems with this is that this is a new strand of so coronavirus is a type of group of virus, and so what we are now experiencing is a new strand of this virus, and there is no immunity. There's no herd immunity. So because there's no vaccine on how to treat it, etc. The potential for this to spread, given the estimates of how transferable it is actually a very high risk situation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unknowns, of course, at the moment, but nevertheless, we should, I think, be taking a relatively conservative view as to the potential risks, and therefore we should be tightening the screws down.
The Chinese president has gone public and said this is a grave situation. The virus, it is actually accelerating in terms of its speed. So the fact that their own president is saying that this is spreading with accelerated speed, I think that is quite concerning. So basically, we're seeing 30 provinces in China that have now been declared a level 1 emergency, which is the highest level. Hong Kong has declared a state of emergency. And basically you have, I've seen estimates anywhere between 48 million to 56 million people being locked down because they are very nervous about this virus spreading right throughout the Chinese continent.
So how do you square that then with the CMO here basically saying there's no real risk at the moment?
Yes. So when I look at what our Prime Minister has done and what our government, what the decisions we're getting out of government, I mean, it seems to me that they have heavily relied on the World Health Organization, which has not declared this to be a global pandemic crisis or an emergency. Now, there are some reports from various experts to say that the World Health Organization may be involved in bureaucratic sort of games, etc. So they may be a little bit slow off the mark. In terms of our Chief Medical Officer, it looks like he's the key source of information that is guiding the Australian government. He said, quote, "No evidence this virus is being transmitted into Australia." Well, that quote was given yesterday, and now we are seeing at least 1 case in Melbourne, at least 3 cases in New South Wales, and there are testing throughout the country, and obviously this quote was given by the Chief Medical Officer after this plane from Wuhan landed in Sydney. So it beggars belief that a medical practitioner could say this, and yet we could see Channel 9 reporting that planes are actually landing from the affected area. So obviously we hope for the best, and we don't we obviously want to be sort of protected. But in terms of someone like me with 2 little kids who need to go about doing their sort of daily business, you place a lot of faith in the Prime Minister, the Parliament, to actually get these decisions right. And we're seeing too many areas of public policy, like what we discussed before, the bushfires, or in terms of this situation, the economy, etc., where bad decisions are being made, and the prudence, the responsibility, the maturity that you need to run an effective government, it is just absent from Canberra, and I've lost basically all forms of confidence that we're being run properly.
Yeah, and of course, if subsequently we see significant increases in infections and more people, getting caught up in this, then it will be another example of too little action, too late. I guess the other point is there is some speculation that the source of the virus might actually be rather different from what was originally positioned.
Yes. I mean, so I think on multiple fronts we're getting a whole host of different information. So for example, so the official count is we've seen about 56 people die, about 2,000 cases worldwide. There are estimates out of the UK who believe that 2,000 is too conservative, that the real estimate is about 6,000. We're also seeing some reports, and perhaps this is quite sensational, but who really knows, that a nurse on the ground in the affected area is saying that the real infection rate is about 90,000 people, and the Chinese government is actually are downplaying what the real sort of spread of the virus is. Now, that video was picked up by the Daily Mail. It is very hard to put a accurate read as to whether that's an accurate video or not. But we're dealing with a government that has a history of secrecy and not being particularly transparent. So given that history, it's hard to judge as to whether we're being fed all the correct information or not. Particularly when the Chinese themselves, they are planning to build at least 1 hospital with 1,000 beds within a 6-day period. Now, when we talk about when we talk about construction standards, I mean, what's the quality of the hospital that's built in 6 days that's going to deal with 1,000 patients? But the fact that they are mobilizing to that degree suggests that there is something serious happening. Now, in terms of the source of the virus, so we've been told a couple of things. So one is that it has come from a seafood market and that's where the source is now. Some of the world media, particularly the Western press, have taken that and reported that. I've seen some other reports that said that some people who had the virus initially, who were tested, never had any contact with the seafood market. So there's a question as to whether the seafood market is or is not the source.
What about the other source? So some people have said it might be from a Chinese laboratory.
Yes. The other thing to consider is that Wuhan has been designated as having a civilian laboratory. It's called the Wuhan National Biosafety Laboratory, and was set up early in 2018. And this is the only designated site in China that is allowed to study a whole host of these deadly viruses. So there are some rumors that it's come from this particular lab. Now, the interesting thing is that so this lab is a civilian operation. But there are reports coming from a couple of sources. One is Free Asia Radio, another one is coming from the Washington Times. And there is a belief that the Chinese government has a secret WMD biological program, and they have been using these civilian labs to actually do testing for their military-grade biological weapons. But they interviewed a former Israeli military officer who's a lieutenant colonel who has studied Chinese biological warfare, and who actually has a doctorate in medical microbiology. And he basically said that this is the only place, if the Chinese were ever going to have a WMD program for biological weapons, this laboratory, which is only about 32 kilometers or 20 miles away from the seafood market, this is the only place in China where it could actually be. People who have talked about this virus on social media, because the first reports of this were, initially surfaced at the beginning of December. So if people talked about it on social media, they were arrested. If journalists reported about this whole situation, the journalists got arrested as well. So the fact that that the Chinese have been trying to suppress in terms of the information and in terms of the crisis. So people reading that is that there is something more sinister or there is something more significant about the origins of this virus that the Chinese government didn't want out among its own domestic population or for the world media to actually pick up. So we don't actually know whether it's come from the seafood market, has it come from the civilian side of the lab, has it come from the military side of the lab, and obviously I'm not a biological expert. When we see a former Israeli military intelligence officer who has deep expertise in this area, when he is suggesting that there is potentially a WMD agent that has been leaked out of a lab, or potentially someone who's been infected inside the lab who has just walked out, and that person was unaware that he got infected. The key point to make on this is our government, our chief medical officer, has incomplete scientific information about, in terms of the virus, in terms of where's it come from, what's actually involved here, and yet, we have not seen, what I would believe is the requisite sort of behaviour from our government to keep us safe. So, when you have all the information, you can make some very wise decisions. But in these sort of situations, when you don't have all the relevant scientific information, I would have thought that people would want to be more cautious. The obvious thing is to, if you are to be cautious, is to ensure that people, who are potentially in the affected area can't hop on a plane and come land in Sydney, and that's exactly what happened 3 days ago. And I think we need a Royal Commission. So we need a Royal Commission to the bushfires, because that whole situation, shouldn't have happened. This whole sporting scandal, we need an investigation to that, because that was just out and out corruption and bribery. And now I think we need a Royal Commission to actually understand who made the decision for these planes to land. When so, for example, there are tourists who came from this affected area who went to the Philippines. All of those people have now been deported, from the Philippines, and all these people have to go back to China. North Korea, of all the countries in the world, they have stopped flights from China going into North Korea. And I'm thinking, well, if Kim up in Pyongyang can figure this out, why can't we're supposed to be smart, sophisticated first world, and yet, Kim from North Korea can figure this out. And he basically said, we're cutting off all flights from China. and we didn't do that. I mean, there is something fundamentally wrong with governance in Australia, and I don't know what it is, but we're just seeing too many mistakes that don't have to happen, and I don't want to say we're a failed state or a banana republic, but it sure feels like it when we're seeing mistake after mistake after mistake happening in in a quick process.
Yeah, and I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that China and Australia have a very interesting relationship, but we are very reliant on the business relationship with China. So my hypothesis would be we don't want to scare the horses, we don't want to frighten that relationship, it's too important for us. So in a way there's probably some sort of trade-off going on between safety to the community versus ensuring that the business end of things still keeps firing. Could be wrong, but I suspect that's probably in the mix somewhere.
The only thing I would say about that, Martin, is that the fact that North Korea has blocked flights now, because North Korea just don't have a economic relationship with China, they have a military reliance on China. So they have more at stake with that relationship than we have with the Chinese, and yet they were able to make the prudent decision that we're not going to allow flights from China to come into Pyongyang, and for some reason we just allowed planes with potential people who are affected to land in Sydney. That just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't understand what's happening to my country.
Yeah. So once again, we seem to be making the wrong decisions, John.
Absolutely, and I think the people, our viewers, it doesn't matter what the issue is. I mean, we're just seeing poor governance across the board, and whether it's we need a fresh election to vote this government out, and it's not just about this government. I think it's parliamentarians across the board. So whether we need a new set of parliamentarians or we just need a radically different, a different mindset, a different culture to ensure that we have, first-class governance. We need to do something fundamentally different because, going into 2020, we're going to see some more economic challenges, and we'll obviously talk about that in subsequent episodes. But we need the best leadership we can have, and we have very dumb leadership at the moment.
Yeah, incompetence rules, John.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. We'll talk next time. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. We'll see you next time.